once it is visible.
Yeah, it is visible. I started recording also. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, yeah, the whole idea for this session is that we'll be going through, first of all, we'll be going through genetic algorithms. And after that, we'll be looking at how quantum can actually accelerate the development of genetic algorithms, accelerate the adoption of genetic algorithms. And finally, the whole idea is to understand why will it actually be a game changer. And in order to do that, we'll go through a few examples, some algorithms, how does genetic algorithm work at its core. And once that is done, we'll look at how each step can be optimized on a quantum environment. And once all of this is done, we'll look at some quantum annealing problems which are being solved in real time. And from there, we'll actually deduce something like a quantum supremacy type environment. So what we want to do is we'll define one problem and we'll solve it on a quantum hardware as well as a classical computer. And over time, we'll keep on increasing the complexity of the problem. And one fine point will come where the quantum computer is faster than the classical computer. So yeah, a lot to unpack today. But as I said, in the meantime, anywhere if you have any questions, doubts, suggestions, anything, feel free to interrupt because let's try to keep this interactive. So with that, let me just go through the higher level points in my talk. So first of all, we'll be looking at what exactly are genetic algorithms and in the broader sense of algorithms, where do they exactly fit? After that, we'll look at the various steps which are required to simulate natural selection. So the whole idea of genetic algorithms is to simulate natural selection, which is basically just mimicking what nature has done for the last 10,000 years. And while I am at this point, let me just clear another doubt, which is this talk won't have a lot of biology content because genetic algorithms are not at all connected with anything related to CRISPR, gene editing, all those kind of things. Drug discovery and gene editing are totally different domains which still have amazing applications in quantum, but for this talk, I think so they remain out of the domain. So I hope that is clear. And if anyone has joined just for the biology part, you might not find this quite relevant. So yeah, after that, we'll go through how exactly can a quantum computer look at genetic optimizations and what are the overall steps which can be changed to work on a quantum environment. What are the quantum domains which are used? So exactly what quantum phenomena are we using to actually get that boost in speed, time complexity, anywhere where we can do an optimization, we'll do it and we'll see how the performance is. Then finally, we'll go through my favorite quantum phenomena, which is quantum tunneling, and why is it amazing, especially in this case. And then finally, we'll look at quantum energy sorting and overall how exactly does genetic algorithm work, what on earth is quantum energy sorting, why is it important, why was it a problem before, all those things. And then finally, we'll have a demo of just seeing how quantum supremacy also works on a simple n square complexity problem, which becomes impossible for a classical computer to handle over a certain time period. So yeah, that's mainly it for the outline. So the whole idea is why exactly should you be excited about genetic algorithms and exactly what is it all about? So as I said before, genetic algorithms are mainly a broader sense of evolutionary algorithms where the whole idea is that so initially when people thought about machine learning, this is exactly what they meant, where you give an ideal loss value towards the end. And the whole idea is that you want to find out any value of input which will have the lowest loss value. So that's entirely what neural networks are about. So any sort of machine learning algorithm, the whole idea is you need to reduce a particular loss variable. And that is done by having neural networks which have algorithms like gradient descent, where you go down directionally until you find a local minimum or global minimum. But this was more preliminary type of machine learning where it was more of a swarm based approach. So let's go through that as well. So ideally, there are mainly two types of algorithms. So the first one is a single solution based, and then we have population based. So further, these algorithms are of the major type called meta heuristics. So the whole idea of meta heuristics is that you don't know the solution from the start, and then you have to build something that will slowly localize on a solution. So to do that, you can have a single solution based algorithm where it's something like you solve a linear equation and you get the value of x which satisfies that particular equation. That's more like a single solution based meta heuristic problem. And then the second one is population based meta heuristics. So this is where make we take advantage of the natural selection phenomena found in nature. So we'll go through all of those things in detail, but the whole idea here is that you employ a lot of people to do the work for you. Something on that scenario where you create a lot of individuals virtually who actually look at that loss function, solve the problem, and come up with the most optimal solution. Now the next step is how do we do this programmatically? So in the case of genetic optimizations, we use some overall operators. So what I'll do is in the subsequent slides, I also have a video where we exactly understand how does genetic optimization work. But till then, what you can think of genetic optimization is that so let's consider an example of, let's say, prehistoric bacteria. From these bacteria, all the current mammals, reptiles, everyone evolved. So the whole reason for doing that was availability of food. So in layman's terms, it's called survival of the fittest. But in this case, survival of the fittest has a very significant meaning, because ultimately who is turned out, so who is determined to be fit? So in this case, someone who is not dying. And death is defined by what? It is defined by the food particles present. So something like how effectively can you do you have access to food? Then are you visible to the predators around? So how quickly do you die in any sort of wild environment determines your fitness. So of course, if you die quickly, that means the fitness is on the lower side. If you die slowly, that means that the fitness is on the higher side. So basically, that is how nature also implemented a loss function in terms of if you live longer, the score of the loss function is higher, and the other way around. So that's how nature devised an algorithm around it where it saw a way to optimize this or increase the loss value for every individual. So in every individual's best interest, he or she or that animal wants to live the longest. So that's why they derived other traits. Like for example, giraffe started having long necks just to reach to their food particle food. Then similarly, beetles started taking the brown color so that they can be camouflaged within the a branch of a tree so that they are not easily visible to predators. So similarly, porcupines, they started having spikes towards their back. Fish started having gills. Stingrays started having electric discharges. So a lot of different species started evolving different features, and the entire goal is just to optimize that one loss value. So effectively, you want to live longer, and that means you want to die slowly and also stay fit throughout your life. So that same thing we are replicating in genetic algorithms. So what happens is we have some sort of encoding where any population, so just let's consider a simple example that giraffe basically comes from the horse family. So effectively you can think of it like a horse evolved slowly to become a giraffe in the relevant geographies. So you can think of it like we are encoding a problem where food is located at a high level, and for that we have a population of horses. Then what happens after the encoding step? We go to the selection step. So in the selection step, we actually so what happens, some of those horse animals, they won't get access to the food particles and thus they will die. So that's how nature automatically selects some of them who are relatively fit, So some of them will be having a bigger height as compared to the others, where they'll be having access to comparatively a larger amount of food, fruits, as compared to someone who is shorter in height. And similarly, they will survive longer. And similarly, they will produce organizations within themselves. So two parents will start the process of crossover, mating. They'll generate new offsprings. These offspring, so if both the parents are tall, the chance of the offspring being tall as well increases. So slowly, the entire population starts uh, keeping a bias towards being heighted or tall. And that's how slowly nature ensures that natural selection plays its part, and ultimately the loss function, which is the survival time, is maximized. So that's the whole idea. And in terms of programming, this is how we solve a problem. We take a loss function and then we have an equation from which the loss function arises. And then we try to find the set of inputs, and also processing output will be lowest. So the loss function value will be lowest. So for that, we have some sort of encoding where we have binary encoding, octal encoding, and we'll get into encoding as well in detail, because every organism has some sort of DNA in genetic optimization. So we'll get into encoding. Yeah, does someone want to speak anything? Hello?
Yeah, and please mute yourself at I mean, if you're not asking question. So, Vinay, we can continue with that. Maybe by mistake it was.
Sure, that's totally fine. So the next step is selection, where let's say you have a generation of 100 individuals and all of them perform one task. So in this case, so let's still consider the example of the horse. What happens is everyone takes a shot at getting the apple on the nearest tree, and then what happens is we do some sort of selection. So in nature, it's done automatically, where the horse which so the animals who don't get food automatically die, and the remaining ones survive for the next generation. But in the case of encoding the problem into some sort of code, we have to ensure a selection criteria as well. So how do we select our various individuals, which are again programmatically generated? So in this case, what happens is we actually rate them on the loss function. So for that, there are various selection methodologies like the roulette selection, where it's more like a cyclic selection, then rank selection, where we rate them based on the fitness and then select the most fittest individual first. And then we have tournament selection, Boltzmann selection, stochastic universal sampling, all these kind of things. So getting into details of all of the selection criterias is beyond the scope of this session, but we'll mainly be going through the rank selection algorithm today. And then finally we have crossover. So let's say you have made your selection from 100 individuals. You know that these 20 are my top performers. Now what do? You need to again create the next generation to start the same process. So from the remaining 20, you need to build the next 80 as well. So in order to do that, you'll have various crossover operations within both the parents. So how do you do that? Then there are various algorithms to do that as well. So you can either have a single point crossover, a k point crossover. So all of these basically determine ways on how to combine two different parents' DNAs and how to generate an offspring. So again, the rest of the crossover operations are also beyond the scope of this session right now. But in order to just understand what genetic algorithms are and how can we use quantum on the same lines, I think so just looking at a single point or uniform crossover is more than enough, where we just combine all the traits from both the parents and create the offspring. Then finally, we have mutation as well. So sometimes what happens in nature is that even if both the parents are tall, then the child has a different height metric. So sometimes nature plays its own random games as well. That is called as mutation. And mutation is beneficial because from mutation, a different species can be generated who can accidentally be very good at the task. So in the case of programming, what we do is once we define the problem, once the selection and crossover is done, in any of these methods for crossover, we don't copy the DNA of the parents as it is. In a very small percent of individuals, we change the DNA by a small bit. And what happens is with that, they get different characteristics, and there is a random element in play here as well. And that random element sometimes gives you a new boost towards reducing the value on the loss function. So that's mainly the steps in genetic algorithm. What we'll do is we'll go through the steps as well properly. So the whole idea is first you create a population. So let's say I want to solve a problem. So my problem is I want to, so let's consider the same example of the horse where my problem is I want to create an animal species which are very good at surviving in domains where there is a, where the trees are comparatively higher, the fruits are placed higher on the trees. For that, what I do is, let's say if I had infinite amount of time and I had a tablet of the 10 commandments where I could just speed up time and see all the generations in a fraction of a second. What I would do is I would create a population of 100 horses. Then what I'll do is some of them would be tall, some of them would be short. Then I would tell all the horses to try and give a shot at eating the apple. Some of them will eat the apple, some of them won't. Then what happens is after that we calculate the fitness. So let's say I fast forward 10 seconds by the snap of my finger, and now what happens is some of the horses have died because they didn't get access to food. Some of them survived. That is the fitness calculation. Now what I do is after this I do crossover. So the horses which are left, we allow them to do the crossover and finally generate new offsprings. And during that, we add a step of mutation where some of the genes are randomly changed. So all these things you don't have control in the natural environment, but when you simulate everything in code to solve a simple problem, that's when you get access to all of these parameters, like quickly changing the DNA, having a small percentage on it. Then once that is done, we have a new generation. So from 100 horses, 40 died. We had 60. Those 60 horses were used to create the next 40 horses, and together we have a new generation of 100 horses. And now again we try the same step. So again we do the fitness calculation. So again we tell them please try to give a shot at eating the apple on the tree. Then again they do that. We have crossover, mutation, survival, selection. Again from the 100, let's say 40, 50 die. The remaining 50 are again used to create the next 50 for the next generation. And in each of the step, what is happening is nature is favoring the ones who have larger heights. So the whole idea is that after let's say 10, 20 generations, we'll only have horses whose neck is large. And just fast forward this by thousands of years, then effectively that's how you evolve from a horse to a giraffe. And the same concept we will be using to solve some algorithmic problems. So what I want to do is, this is a simple YouTube video so I really follow this channel, and he has explained genetic algorithms properly by giving a simple example of a backpack and how can we actually deduce algorithms to just make sure that the bag is packed in the most efficient way. So let's go through it, and please interrupt me if you can't hear the video properly. I'll maybe go through it manually. So just give it a second.
Did you know that you can simulate evolution in your computer? And that sources in the description below. But what does it all have to do with evolution in my computer, I hear you say? Have I been clickbaited again? No, because today we will explore one class of algorithms called genetic algorithms. Genetic algorithms can be used to generate solutions for problems for which we have no way to calculate a solution. And that is what we need right now. Genetic algorithms are part of a bigger group of algorithms called evolutionary algorithms. And they use natural selection to approximate solutions for a given problem. For instance, you can use it to generate the pack list for your backpack. But another way is to use it to generate the form of an antenna, as done by NASA in 2006. And this is called an evolved antenna, which a genetic algorithm generated to find the best radiation pattern. It looks a bit funky, but who am I to argue with evolution? So let's see how it works. A genetic algorithm uses a population of possible solutions. In our case, that would be combinations of items in our backpack. Each specimen in our population has a genome that encodes the solution. It is a binary encoding of the content in our backpack. A 1 says that this item of the item list is inside the backpack, and when there is a 0, it is left out. The set of all current solutions at a given point during the algorithm is called the generation. Generation 0, the starting generation, is just a random mess of possible solutions. So we start our evolutionary process with complete chaos. Now it's time to start the process of natural selection to simulate the survival of the fittest. We use a fitness function to determine how good a given solution is. In our case, the fitness function returns the value of the packed items as long as it fits into the weight limit. If the weight limit is exceeded, the fitness of the specimen is 0. After that, we are selecting the parents for the next generation of solutions. Generally speaking, a solution with a higher fitness score is more likely selected for reproduction than one with a very low fitness score. Like in real life, the buff dudes get the girls. We choose 2 parents and cut their genome at a random spot in half and switch the endings. This is called the single point crossover function, and it generates 2 new solutions for the next generation. We repeat the process as long as we don't have enough specimens in the next generation. Did you notice how by crossing 2 solutions, we got a better one? I find it really incredible to see that natural selection not only works in nature, but even simulated in the computer, it generates better solutions from generation to generation. But there's one thing to note here, because...
Yeah, so basically that covers the crux of it. And the whole idea is, effectively what he has done is, the first step was that he encoded the problem, where as we went through it, so the whole idea was that he initially created a population of backpacks, and after that, after creating a population of backpacks, everyone had a certain DNA. So this DNA is shown here, where if an item is present, it is 1. If it is not present, it is 0. And this is how you create a DNA for a single individual. Once that is done, you have an entire generation of such individuals. Then what you do is, after the generation is there, you perform the fitness logic, where you find the fitness of the entire generation. So yeah, for example, this one, where effectively all of them have some score, but for this bag, the weight was going beyond the limit. That's why the fitness is 0. So ideally what we want to do is we want to maximize the fitness score. So then what happens is we kill this bag or kill this individual, and from the remaining individuals, we again create the next generation. So here what we do is we choose the top performers. So let's say 1065 and 1050. We take them and we create the next generation. How do we do that? That is mentioned here, where we take the DNA of those individuals and randomly swap it. And that's how we get an entirely different generation as well of backpacks. And the whole idea is the next generation will be a little bit better at doing that task as compared to the previous generation. And that's how when you run the simulation for hundreds and thousands of generation, that's when you get individuals who are really good at performing that particular task. So effectively, let's just go through how it works. So the whole idea is that inside genetic algorithms, you have an entire population, and inside that population, you have a lot of individuals. In this case, A1, A2, A3, and A4. Each one of those individuals, they have a particular genome or DNA. You can call it anything. And then what happens is each of the DNA strands or genes, they have a specific value. And this is how it is represented in code. So ideally, the population is more like an array of different individuals held together, which is again an array of different genes mentioned together, which is either 0 or 1. And after that, the whole idea of the machine learning logic here is where you have two different individuals, you perform the crossover action, you generate new individuals. Ultimately, the whole individual set of individuals, the population, is coming close to the ideal loss function value. So if you want to reduce the loss function value, if you want to maximize the reward function value, ideally the entire population is moving into that direction. So that is how the machine learning part comes in. So basically that was mainly it about the introduction and what are the fundamentals of genetic algorithms. And what we'll do is now basically we'll go through individual steps, and we will discuss if they are difficult, why are they difficult, and why is genetic algorithm a big problem and how to solve it. So the first thing which we can think of is in genetic algorithm, if anything can be represented in the form of a loss function, it can be solved properly, or you can get an individual which will have a lowest value for that function, given that you run it for enough generations. Now the problem is, let's say you're building a neural network, and in this neural network you have different types of neural networks, and from all those different types you start the initial population. Then performing all of these steps serially, where you do the fitness calculation, then you do crossover, mutation, survivor selection, and then finally you again start with the next generation until you reach a particular loss value which you are happy with, and then you terminate the algorithm. So this is very CPU intensive, and ideally you always go to the global minimum in the case of genetic algorithms. But the whole problem is that this is crazy expensive in terms of computation. So for example, if you had anything more than 15-20 variables, and if you wanted to run for, let's say 10,000, 20,000 generations, it is still a very computationally expensive task. And that's why neural networks picked up steam, because in neural networks there is a directional aspect. For example, whenever we do gradient descent, that's when we know exactly which direction to go in order to reduce the loss value. So in the case of this example, instead of randomly combining two parents, we know exactly what parameter to change which will affect the loss value the most. So that's why due to the expensive compute requirements, genetic algorithms were left back. But ideally, they have potential to solve a lot of bigger problems. Now let's do one thing. Let's go through individual steps and see how quantum can benefit. So the first step is to randomly create a population. Now the thing is, for classical computers, generating purely random numbers is very difficult. So if anyone knows how random numbers are generated, then effectively they can relate to this, where it is always tied to some sort of process. So for example, some computers use weather data to generate random numbers. Some of them use action on some distant star to generate random numbers. Some of them just have some noise value coming from the microphone and that is sampled to give out random numbers. And some of them, they trigger some sort of CPU operation, and whatever the output is, that is triggered as a random number. But the problem is, none of these numbers are truly random. So for example, even if you take the mic input, that is not a random number, it's based on some sort of ground truth. So that's why creating entirely random numbers is a very difficult task for classical computers. And this is where the power of quantum comes, because if you want to do effective mutation, like let's say you from a generation of 100 individuals, if you want to create 2-3 individuals which are entirely different from the generation, you should not base them on some sort of ground truth. So for example, you should not keep the generation focused on the previous parents, the generation before that. Instead, they should be purely random. So that's where parameters like these come in, where you need purely random numbers and not pseudo random numbers. So basically what I mean is, you should not be able to write an equation which can give you the output of that random number. Okay, so in the case of quantum computers, this is solved in a very interesting way. So what happens is quantum noise generation has seen a lot of commercial application. So random numbers are not only used in the case of genetic algorithms, but anywhere you want to create any sort of value which should not be guessed. For example, if you are creating a new node on blockchain, if you are creating public private keys, if you are maintaining RSA encryptions for any HTTPS website, in all of these things, creating random numbers is very important. Now the next step is how does a quantum computer do it? So in the case of quantum computers, we get access to a gate, and that can give us the dealing with a phosphorus atom. Then what happens is we can get the entropy value of that particular phosphorus atom, and effectively what happens is it measures the change in the state of that atom from any random time interval, and effectively this gives us a true random value. So the first application in quantum computers and how do they work with genetic optimization is that with quantum hardware you can get access to true random numbers. Now how do we do it? So first of all, we prepare the circuit on any finite state. Once that is done, we do state measurement. After the state measurement is done, we take the output, and what we do is after we take the output, it is again passed in as the input on the entropy gate. And once we get the output from this entropy gate, what we do is we do an entropy verification operation on top of it, which is just a check that the number which is generated is entirely random. And once that is done, we get our random entropy output. And this is a very exciting part because suddenly you have gone from creating pseudo-random numbers to random numbers. And that basically is a very big advantage for genetic algorithms, because now you can create individuals which are having no relation with their parents. And effectively that can increase your chance of finding a breakthrough. So breakthrough is any individual who has done the task in a record amount of time. Okay, so that is one of the first benefits of using quantum hardware. One more very important step is, so if we look at what exactly is the problem for genetic algorithms to pick up mainstream adoption, it's mainly the aspect where you need to simulate an entire generation, then sort the generation on some sort of fitness score. Once it is sorted, then what you need to do is you need to kill a few individuals and use the remaining individuals to fill the generation again. So for this, there is a lot of sorting involved. So that's when again quantum computers can come to rescue, where there is a very interesting algorithm which can be used for quantum sorting. And effectively what it does is it uses the multiple micro universe theory in quantum computing, where effectively it's more like until you observe a state on a quantum computer, it's pseudo-random. And with that, we create this sorting algorithm. So again, I have a video over here to go through quantum sorting, which we'll go through towards the end of this session. But the whole idea is quantum can sort an array of individuals in O of n time. So basically, as the number of inputs increase, the time required for sorting also increases linearly. But in the case of classical computers, it is O of n squared. So if the number of parameters increase, the time required for sorting increases exponentially. So basically, this is again a point where we can use quantum hardware for getting a considerable advantage. And basically after this, let's look at how the algorithm looks like. So basically we start the program. After we started the program, we initialize a population, and we initialize all the parameters as well. So once we create the population, effectively we are creating the DNA only. There is nothing else in a programmatic population. Then what we do is we test every individual. So whatever is the fitness test, in the case of horse, it was eating the fruit. In the case of any neural network, it can be the loss value. In case of any other program, it can be something else, which is the ideal goal of that particular program. If you have dots on a graph, it can be how far are they from the global minimum, something like that. And once that is done, we set the best individuals as the evolutionary goal of next generation. So the whole idea is we'll use the best individuals and they will be used to create the next generation. Okay, so once that is done, we check for a final condition. Like let's say we have a benchmark that this is how low the loss function should be, or this is how high the accuracy metric should be. If that condition is met, we exit from the program. If it is not met, then what we do is we again test every individual of the next generation. So now we have created the next generation, and for that we test the individuals again. Once that is done, we do a update population using quantum rotating door. So what we do is we again take the DNAs of all of these fit individuals and we mix it up. After mixing it, what happens is we get a new set of individuals which comprise the next generation. Once that is done, we perform an operation of quantum mutation on top of it. This is where we generate true random numbers. And once the true random numbers are generated, we use that to tweak the DNA a little bit. Then this can make the individual better or worse in both scenarios. Then what we do is we again keep the best individual in memory and we record its fitness as well. So after this, what happens is we have a colony disaster type phenomena. So if no one from that particular generation is working properly, then what we do is we call it as colony disaster. So if no one has passed the final condition, the colony has become a disaster. Then what we do is we increase the time count and we again create the next generation. So this is how, mainly by initializing a population, selecting the population and mutating. And all of this can happen blazingly fast on a quantum computer. So we'll go through a live problem as well, which makes use of this same phenomena to solve the minimum vertex cover problem. So the whole idea is in the case of quantum computers, so as we looked at it before in the overall general genetic algorithm framework, what happens is if you need to do crossover, that's when you have some way of combining both the individuals. So you either chop off the DNA from between, just like the backpack example, where we swapped the right side of the DNA. But normally, a better way of solving the same problem would be that you combine multiple parts from multiple DNAs. And this is when you can use quantum hardware as well. So for example, in the case of quantum computers, everything is either amplitude or phase of that particular atom. Then what happens is of that particular qubit. So then what happens is if you want to combine multiple states together, that's when it's just a binary addition of both of the states. So instead of performing complex algorithms or complex logics, you just need to add the state of two different qubits, and that's when you can get the new DNA. So all of this gives a very big boost to overall quantum computers. So basically, one more thing that I want to go through in this session is that I have this Udemy course where I am teaching quantum computers from the beginning and how to use the D-Wave framework and solve a few problems. And just for you guys who have actually taken out the time to attend this session, I have this coupon code which is Zen4QTM. And if you use this code, you'll get access to this course for free, and you can use it for, you can keep it with you for how long as you want. Only thing is this code will be valid for the next 3 days. So please just enroll into the course if you are interested in those kind of things. And I'll be more than happy to help you out on those fronts as well. So one more thing that I would like to go through is how exactly can all of these things come together, and do we actually see any result, or is this just all theory and no play kind of talk? So let's do that actually. Let's go through an example. So by the time it's connecting, what we are going to do is, this is basically a very simple min vertex cover problem. So what happens is, let's assume that this is a map of a city. Okay, now in this city, we have different junctions. Okay, and on every junction, we have roads connecting two different junctions together. Now the task for us is basically we are the security administrator of this particular city. It looks very simple, but we are the security administrator. And our task is that there has been a lot of robberies recently, and we have to place security cameras in such a way that if anyone starts their journey, so let's say from point 1 I have to go to point 2, or let's say from point 4 I want to come back to point 1, in that case I should be under the radar of any single security camera. Okay, now how do we do it? So the ideal solution will be, let's place security cameras at all the junctions, so that any journey which I take from point 1, let's say 1 to 0, I'm covered at both the ends. If I go from point 1 to 2, I'm covered at all three ends. But now the problem is our city is on a very tight budget, because we have put in some tax reforms and it's very difficult to maintain the budget. And that's why the mayor has ordered you to keep the budget as low as possible, but still have a fully functional security system. So then what you do is you start thinking. So if anyone wants to start from any of these nodes, so let's say from 2, I want to go to 3. So if I start from 2, in order to go to 3, 0 is my only option. So I have to go through 0. Then if I want to go from 4 to 0, from 4, if I start my car, I'll stop at 0. So similarly, what happens is any journey on this particular graph has to go through point 0. So even if it is 1 to 0, it has to go through point 0. So what I tell the mayor is that we can just install one security camera at point 0, and still that will cover all the different journeys that the user might undertake. So effectively what we have done is we have solved a min vertex cover problem, or minimum vertex cover. Now what happens is in order to efficiently just see the solution of this problem through our eyes, I've created a problem which is as simple as this one. But in reality, cities are very complex and they have multiple interconnected nodes. And the solution for this problem in our case is the node 0. But in the case of normal cities, it can be multiple nodes as well. But now let's do one thing. Let's see how a classical system will solve the problem. So what I'm doing is I've created a star graph of 4 nodes. So let me zoom in a little. Yeah, so I've created a star graph of 4 nodes. So effectively this one, where we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 nodes. And now what I want to do is I want to solve it using a classical computer. Okay, so the answer which I've got is the point 0. And now the time was 2.1 milliseconds, which is blazing fast. So we solved this problem in 2.1 millisecond on a classical computer. Now let's do one thing. Let's make use of a quantum computer. So basically I'm using the D-Wave Leap dashboard, where here I have the research account where I get a few minutes every month. And a minute might not see a lot of seem like a lot of time on a quantum computer, on a classical computer, but ideally it's huge on a quantum hardware, because every experiment runs for hardly a few milliseconds, if not a few microseconds. So 1 minute of time can last for about 4,000, 5,000 experiments. So let's do one thing. Let's solve the same problem by using the D-Wave annealer hardware. So let's wait till we get the solution. Okay, here it is. Now the solution from the quantum computer as well is 0. So now what happened? We solved the problem in 58.1 milliseconds, which is way longer than what it took for the classical computer to solve the same problem. Now this is where things start to get exciting. So all of these statistics were for a star graph of 4 nodes. And the reason why it was so quick is that as the number of nodes increase, so from 4, now when I go to 10 nodes, all the possible combinations. So over here, there are only a few combinations where I can go from 1 to 0, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. Similarly, from 2 to 0, 2 to 1, 2 to 3. So all the permutation and combinations of the route are not much. But in the case of a graph with 10 nodes, the number increases. So now let's see the increase in time. So I've again imported a 10 node graph. And now I want to solve it using a classical computer. Okay, now first of all, what we can see is a classical computer solved this problem in 8 milliseconds. Okay, so first it took the classical computer 2 milliseconds. From there, now it has went to 8 milliseconds. So effectively, it is almost 4 times increase. This is because the number of permutation combinations in this graph has increased a lot, but effectively our input parameter didn't increase 4 times. So from 4, the star graph was not of 16 nodes. So similarly, let's look at it through the quantum computer as well. So yeah, this took around 76 milliseconds. So let me just walk through what is happening here. So it is taking the star graph problem. So all we are doing is we are initializing the min vertex cover object, and we are passing it the star graph and the sampler or the quantum environment where we want to solve the problem. So what it is doing is it is taking this problem, converting it into a mathematical representation, sending it to the D-Wave system across the globe, getting the solution, and then displaying it back to us. So most of this time is also spent in network communication. So this is not the exact time taken by the quantum computer. But nevertheless, what has happened is from 58 milliseconds, we went up to only 76 milliseconds. So this is not a 4 times increase. So quickly you can start to see the trend where a classical computer, the time required increases very quickly, but in a quantum computer, it increases relatively slowly. So from 58, we went to only 76. Now let's increase the difficulty one step, where now we have a 15 node problem. So from 10, we went to 15 nodes. Now let's run it from a classical computer. Now in total, it took 138 milliseconds. Okay, so from 8 milliseconds, now it went up to 138 milliseconds. So effectively, this is more like a 15x jump. So now instead of, and the input variable has not increased 15 times. From 10, we just made it 15. So it has increased 0.5 times. So the whole idea is in the case of a classical computer, what happens is these are n square complexity problems. So something like if you increase the number of input variables, then the time required increases exponentially. So let's run this on a classical computer as well, on a quantum computer. So in this case, the time is 108 milliseconds. Okay, so if we look above, it was 76 milliseconds for the QPU, quantum processing unit, and right now it is 108 milliseconds. But one very interesting thing has happened, which is basically right now, instead of the classical computer being faster than the quantum computer, for the first time, we have a quantum computer being faster than the classical counterpart. So just like here, where the CPU was faster than the QPU, quantum processing unit. In this case, once we increase the complexity of the problem enough, we see that a QPU starts becoming faster. This is where a linear curve is faster than an exponentially increasing curve. And let's say we do the same for a 19 node problem and we run it on a quantum computer. So basically now it has taken 2.3 seconds. So from 138 milliseconds, it is again almost 12, 14, 15x increase in the time taken. But the input has not increased a lot. From 15, it has only gone to 19. That's because a classical computer goes through all the different permutation and combinations. Now just imagine if you have to do protein simulation, if you want to do drug discovery, where instead of 15, 20 parameters, in the case of protein, you have a few million parameters to simulate. It is next to impossible to do it on a classical environment. So that's why all of these supercomputers are built where a small subset of this problem is solved. But in the case of quantum hardware, what happens is we clearly beat the time taken by any classical computer to perform parallelized application. So basically this is a separate solver. Let's run this. And again, you can see that now the increase is further more prominent. So the time taken by the quantum hardware is just 87 milliseconds, but the time taken by a classical computer is 2.15 seconds. So it is more than an order of magnitude faster than a classical computer. So this is how you can use quantum hardware powered by the algorithms like genetic optimization to effectively solve problems quicker than classical counterparts. This is why a lot of startups are coming on board as well, where you go through a lot of new problems which are multivariate problems, where we can solve these problems by having, let's say, true random values, or we can have different generations together. So that's mainly the idea behind looking at this example. It is not quantum supremacy in the true sense, but we at least get an idea of what all is possible if we go through these newer architectures. And finally, before we conclude, I would like to show one more thing that I was working on. So I was working on this white paper with David Wilkinson. I guess he is here on the call as well. So we were building an ion path optimization for using genetic optimization for, and we also demoed it at IBM, I believe. So yeah, that is some exciting work in progress. And apart from that, basically, this is where you can find me. This is my number, my email, LinkedIn, and then I also have my Udemy profile listed here. So if you want, you can go through this Udemy profile. You can look at any course that you want. And finally, I can give you access to that course for free. And yeah, you can also scan this QR code to get access to all of these links. So thank you so much for taking out the time. I really appreciate it and hope this was helpful for you. And now let's do one thing. Let's open the forum for questions. I'll keep it on this slide so that we have a sense of what we are talking about. Over to you, Balaji.
Thanks, Vinay, for giving a insight into the genetic algorithm. Even I'm coming from biology background. I understand the importance of this algorithm, which is relevant to the quantum level. So initially I thought it is not relevant to biology, but it has a lot of foundation from there, and even biologists can get benefits and understanding how this is prompted the evolution, basically. And so I opened the floor for question answer, and I see some in chat already. And we can start answering the chat questions first.
Sure. So what I can do is I can start with Vipul and go down. And if you have any questions, so guys, you can put it in the chat box, or maybe just unmute and start speaking. All right. So the first question is how one is creating population in the quantum and embedding the chromosome onto the qubits. So what happens is basically if you have created a simple problem. So in the case of quantum, any sort of problem is basically energy minimization problem. So how I explain it is basically if you have a hot cup of coffee, and if you keep it out in the open for some time, its temperature drops. So basically it is losing energy. Then on the other side, if you have a very cold cup of coffee, and then if you keep it out in the open, it gains energy. So for any atom, the rule of coming down to the lowest energy state is what is programmed into the laws of physics. So basically, if you want to simulate any problem on a quantum environment, you have to make sure that it is simulated in a way which can trigger energy minimization. So basically what I would say is if you want to embed a particular chromosome, so let's say it is 0 or 1. So we used to do it as 0 or 1 because we were working on a classical environment, but on a quantum computer where we have qubits, what happens is it is not necessarily bound to 0 and 1. On qubits, you can have any percentage of value. something that is 40% 0, 40% 0 and 60% 1, or 50-50. And these 0 and 1 can determine to what range that particular chromosome is. And physically, if you want to ask how this happens, so you can either change the magnetic field of that particular atom, or you can trigger some sort of spin on it, or you can add some sort of gate operation. That's how you can embed a chromosome on the qubit. So I hope that answered it. The next one is how one is creating population in the quantum and embedding the chromosomes onto qubits. I think so this is the same one. Yeah. So regarding random numbers, it is true that classical computer can't generate true random numbers easily, but benchmarks show that classical generated pseudo-random numbers are good enough. Is there any empirical evidence that true random numbers improve the time to find good solutions? So very good question, Sebastian. So my answer to this will be effectively what happens is as we create more and more pseudo random numbers, then what happens is the ability for any sort of random system. So for example, if you look at a quantum hardware, it is a random heuristic based system. So in that case, simulation becomes a very easy task. So effectively, if you generate pseudo random numbers, and if you have a competitive enough quantum hardware as well, then you can get a proof where the quantum computer gives out a random number which is more beneficial. So beneficial as in it is having a bigger impact on the performance. Till this stage, what is happening is this is still an area in research where personally I haven't seen a production algorithm which benefits hugely from true random numbers versus pseudo random numbers, except the time for a computer to generate a pseudo random number. But that is something which is very actively going on, and let's see, we might see a breakthrough in the same domain in a few years. But for now, this is a very good question, and my answer to that will be, unfortunately, we don't have any empirical evidence to show that true random numbers can find good solutions. It's more like the classical physics conundrum, where if you want to show that the universe is constantly expanding, or the shape of the universe is like an inflated balloon, then you need to have sensors which are accurate enough. And unfortunately, we are not having state-of-the-art quantum computers just yet, because I personally believe that we are still away from the perceptron-like moment in quantum hardware, where before that it was more like a research phase, and suddenly after just creating neural networks and finding widespread applications, suddenly AI became a buzzword. Similarly, we need some innovation in quantum before we start to find systems which are actually state-of-the-art enough to work on the problems. Then regarding sorting, you said that sorting scales exponentially, but efficient classical algorithms exist for sorting in polytime. So how should this help speed up genetic algorithms? So again, this is a very good question. What we do is, basically, in the case of sorting equations in a polynomial time, what happens is it is still a time which is not constant. But in the case of quantum computers, if you can embed the equation using some sort of QUBO rules like quadratic unconstrained binary optimization, those kind of rules, and if you can map any sort of equation to a low energy state, then what happens is in the case of quantum hardware, they have a fixed complexity. So it's O of K or O of L, where K is a constant. So not even polynomial time, the time complexity becomes a flat line. So if you can effectively simulate, it all depends on how effectively the simulation is happening on the quantum environment and what is the classical interference. So if the simulation is good enough, then we don't even need a polynomial time. That's where...
I get your point. This is question speaking. I get your point, but the question basically is, if you want to do some proper generic or general and universal sorting, then as far as I know, there is no quantum algorithm that would outperform any of the typical classical sorting algorithms like quicksort, for example. Yes, there might be some special cases where you definitely could map your sorting problem to some constant time circuits. That might be possible for some special cases, but especially for the sorting part in your genetic algorithm, where you need to sort the entire population. This, in my opinion, is more or less a very general and universal sorting thing and problem that you need to solve, right? So honestly speaking, I doubt that there something like quantum sorting will help.
So actually what I would say is to response, my response will be currently what the whole idea is that we are looking at quantum sorting from a polynomial perspective. So basically if you have n set of inputs, then what will be the time complexity of sorting those things? But what happens is if you have a true quantum hardware, quantum processor, which is still a little bit far from getting something like that into production. But if you have a true quantum processor, then what happens is some sort of problems can be simulated where they benefit from quantum. I'm not saying that it's a it's an algorithm which can fit all different types of problems, and a wrapper like this, building a wrapper like this is further difficult. And that's why currently still ML is not on the edge of quantum computers. Otherwise, if this was possible, we would have neural networks being trained on the quantum hardware, because this can be very efficient comparisons and sorting. But that is why all problems cannot be simulated, but some of them where you can have a direct one-on-one mapping to the energy states versus some sort of input parameter, for them definitely this is a like basically the time complexity for a quantum hardware would be constant as compared to a polynomial time complexity. So what I would say is for a selected set of problems right now, it can fit into the hypothesis. And as we explore new quantum algorithms, I'm sure something like, general purpose quantum sorting algorithm will definitely come up, which has universal mapping to the energy domain. Yep. So, okay, what else do we have? Okay, yeah. Vinay, do you have a GitHub repo with your source code and similar examples? Yeah, sure. I'll put it in the chat box. How long will it take today for a quantum computer to decrypt information that has been encrypted with state-of-the-art encryption algorithms? So honestly, I don't know the answer to this, because it all depends on how quickly we innovate on the quantum computing front. It will still take a lot of time. Some people estimate that it will take multiple thousand qubits to break AES 256 encryption. But I would say that is still some years away, if not a few decades at least, before quantum computers can break state-of-the-art encryption. And by that time anyway, state-of-the-art encryption will evolve. So yeah, then how to start learning annealing. So basically what I would recommend is you can just get started with the D-Wave Leap system, go through some examples, how to set up a quantum environment, and then how to start run various problems on the quantum environment, and finally how does the QUBO part of the entire equation work. So I would say to learn annealing, best way would be to start by looking at the D-Wave Leap dashboard. Then how do you input the data? So in order to input data on the quantum hardware, currently what we do is there is a mapping which is generated by the classical computer. So something like we have a fixed set of inputs, those are converted into number of qubits and the starting state. And based on that, we create the input. Then please share code to join Udemy course. Yeah, 1 second, let me share that. Yep, I have put that here. Is it possible for planets like Jupiter can be using genetic algo? So what I would think is currently the overall process of having genetic algorithms work on any sort of living ecosystem. So let's call Earth an ecosystem. And the reason why we are having genetic algorithms working here is that effectively we have individuals, we have organizations, we have deaths, we have we have new offsprings which are generated. So the entire reproduction cycle is going on. But on the case of in the case of Jupiter, I'm not sure if that's a scenario. But definitely, even at the most atomic level, all the laws of physics are being obeyed. So even the construction of the automatic construction of gas bubbles, the automatic construction of volcanoes, all of this can be an example of genetic optimization at a very large scale, where all the atoms together find value to a loss function or something. Yeah, then Kuiper, world's largest natural quantum computer. Okay, I'm looking at Udemy courses too. Could you share the code? Yep, I've shared the code, and then you can just go through my Udemy profile. And if you want any course, just feel free to message me or email me, and I'll make sure you get access to it. I'm putting those things in the chat as well. Yeah, so your presentation covers how quantum computing can be used to improve each phase of a genetic algorithm. Have you given thought how the entire algorithm itself can be improved through quantum computers? Example, possibly some phases can be folded together. So actually a very good point, Noel. So I have given some thought to this, and effectively there are some ways. For example, in the case of neural networks, we have gradient descent, but in the case of quantum computers, it's random mutation. So what can be done is, instead of having random mutation, mutation can also be a factor of random as well as the direction of the previous generation. So for example, if altering a particular DNA value can give the most output in terms of exactly how it is affecting the loss score, and keeping the directionality aspect here can greatly improve genetic algorithms. Not sure how quantum can be leveraged on that front, but let's see, I'm pretty sure that some efficient ways of doing the same thing can come up. Even if we achieve a constant or even a linear time complexity for genetic algorithms as a whole by using quantum hardware, that will still be a very big game changer in both the domains, because we'll effectively solve a lot of new problems which cannot be solved by classical computers. But still, what I would say is, in order to do it in a production level system, there is some maturity still pending on the quantum computer side. Yep, so I think so I've covered everyone from the chat. Yeah, so anyone has any other questions, or Balaji, back to you.
Thanks, Vinay. So I think we almost cover all the expected areas and question answers also. So if anybody else want to talk in general terms like networking, we can start. If you want to cross-pollinate the ideas and your interest in future talks and what you would like to have, those things we can discuss. And we conclude the talk, Vinay, and we'll open the floor for general discussion. And thanks, Vinay, for the insight. It was really interesting topic, and it made our weekend more productive. Even I thought going to gym is pain, but I know natural selection expect us to change our habits to good. So that's in a general term, I can say is useful for all levels. And thanks for the talk. And Kumar, you want to add something?
Hey, thanks, Balaji. I think wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Advance happy holidays, and we will publish these recordings shortly on the meetups and Eventbrite. But great, and any questions?